Father, we desire strength to be able to stand in the days that are coming. We give you all the glory and praise in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Okay. Let's review these lines and then go back into where we left off on page 10, but on page 3. Whoop, trapped myself here. Page 3, this is this line. And how do you say this? Thermopylae is he's got a question mark on his, and a question mark here on his line, but later on he's going to identify this as midnight, right? Mm-hmm. And this is suggesting that there's some kind of activity between the United States and Russia prior to Raphia, yes? Whether this corresponds to the prediction before midnight or not, I would think the prediction would probably include that, but who knows. This here is the line of the Persian kings, typifying the presidents, but this line of Persian kings, it's got at least, 3 prophetic applications that we're acknowledging, right? You got 7 Persian kings and the 7 thunders, and then he's arguing about 10 Persian kings later on. But in here, we have the 3, there yet shall 3 stand up, and the 4th is far richer, which is typifying Trump. We haven't said much about it, but he's putting in place that the military and economic buildup comes even well before midnight. What we've presented in past is definitely there's an economic military buildup going on between midnight and the midnight cry. But he's saying it's starting right here at Trump's election, which is valid. The other, we don't have to put that in place. Anyone else want to throw something in here that we need to put in place? The 2 10s. We're seeing 10s in this history. From midnight cry to Sunday law, we got a doubling of 10s in the 2 lines of the presidents. Anyone else want to throw in something into that line before we go to the next one? Just to refresh ourselves before we move on. Okay, Sister Cheryl's here now, so yesterday at the end of the class, after the class, she brought up the question, and I think we probably discussed it before, and she wasn't here, or it didn't get discussed specifically. But it is something, it's part of what you have to grapple with in this Daniel 11, and it's this, that the Seleucid kingdom is the king of the north, right? But Rome is going to come conquer the Seleucid kingdom and become the king of the north. And you want to express how you were saying that yesterday, so I put it in the record correctly. You got the Seleucid kingdom in contrast with the Ptolemaic kingdom. Is that how you say it? The king of the north and the king of the south. Ptolemaic. So she's having a struggle that I think we all should at least acknowledge that it's there. And what is it, Sister Cheryl?
How they both can be, how the king of the south can be the king of the south and the king of the north, or how it can be both, because Syria, we're saying, is the king of the north.
No, we're saying now that Syria, which is the Seleucid kingdom, is the king of the north in the past, but we're saying now that Syria is the king of the south, typifying Russia. What's our justification for taking Syria, the Seleucid kingdom that's the king of the north, and bringing it down here to the end of the world and saying, no, here it's representing the king of the south. Anyone want to answer that for her? Okay.
I think it's context. It's like anything else. It's symbols can have more than one meaning, and you have the lines are our pattern. You know, you have the key that is the lines, and when you look at passages, you have components of that passage. So let's say in this one we have the king of the north, the king of the south, and Rome is in the thing. You know, so you have to identify who these three players are, but you may be looking at, and you may come to the conclusion that Rome, which we have, that Rome is Rome, the papacy. The king of the north is the king of the north as the United States, and then the king of the south is Russia. You may come to that conclusion in that particular passage, but then you look at another passage where Syria is also mentioned, or the same dynasty or whatever, but in a different context, and it's going to show you a different picture, theoretically, of something else, and you have to plug in those characteristics into the line, and you may get a different picture of who that person is, when before they were one thing, now they have changed.
Anyone else want to say it a little bit more simply?
Symbols can have more than one meaning. Context. There you go.
Context, symbols can have more than one meaning. Does that probably don't satisfy you, Sister Cheryl, right? Okay. That's what we're dealing with, though, is that we're taking these histories and putting them in the context of the end of the world. And in order to establish that context, you're going to have 2 or 3 witnesses. And that's what he's been doing up to page 10 on these various lines. Our brother from Africa. So on page 7, we have this one down here. Okay. And instead of here, now it's starting in 1989, this line that's on page 7, and this is starting in 1989. It doesn't say it up here, but it is because you got Reagan and Bush, you got the same starting point. But up here, he's using the history of Darius and Cyrus to line up with Reagan and Bush. This line, it's Cyrenius, is that how you say it? And Magnus. So it's a different line, but he's going to show the same characteristics. Here is his argument for military and economic consolidation before Raphia, which is midnight. And here in this line, he is plugging in, he's identifying Raphia and Panium. And he notes Kohler in here in this history because this is going to contribute to his argument on Daniel 8. Or Kohler. How do you pronounce that? Kohler or Kohler? Okay, so I'm not the only one that is unfamiliar with that. Any other comments on that before we move on?
So on one line he's saying that Syria is the king of the south, but on the other line where we're dealing with the Raphia Panium, is he saying the same thing or is he switching them? No, he's still saying the same thing.
Yeah, same thing, yeah.
Because Syria is replaced by Russia, right? Is that what we're saying?
Not replaced by. Syria is typifying Russia.
Yeah, I mean typified.
Okay. Are there other comments, observations?
So then what does Antiochus or Seleucus kingdom represent?
Antiochus.
So the Seleucus kingdom basically
King of
was
the
the
north.
king of the north. Antiochus is another name for the power of the king of the north. What are we saying out there that it is in that history? Do we even deal with that or?
What are we saying that these guys are in this history?
Yeah.
This is when they're returning to go all the way up to the borders of Egypt. They're coming against the king of the south, but they're leaving the head, they're leaving the capital, they're leaving Russia, they're taking the territory. So this is the king of the north, which is the papacy, but the military might of the papacy was the United States. Right? Yes? This would be better. This is fine. I have no criticisms. You've seen how I do my lines, all right? But this would be nice to have right under here and extend it out to raffia lining up here. But we'll get to that eventually. Any other comments on this particular line in the notes?
Yes, they were questioning whether the Bush speech was done twice, and it was done September 11, 1990 and September 11, 1991. So there was a doubling there. And there's definitely 2 tens at the beginning, as you see at the end.
Definitely 2 tens.
Well, you have 2 tens at the end, right? The platea and the
You mean 10 and 10?
10, and then at the beginning you have 10 and 10. You have the 10 years of wars, and then you have the 10 years of preparation to take down the king of the south, or to actually take down the body. Never mind.
What's the 10 and the 10 in 1990 and 1991 you're talking about?
Oh, yesterday we were talking about.
Yeah, I know what we're talking about, but where are you seeing a 10 and a 10?
Oh no, I'm not talking about that. Well,
Okay.
it was actually 10 years from the speech of Bush
From 79 to 89.
to September 11, 2001. 1991 to 2001. There's 10 years.
Okay, so you're saying from here, if we're treating this not as 1989, but as a period of time, including 1991 when he announces the New World Order, it takes you up to here somewhere, 10 years exactly, September 11th, 1991 to September 11th, 2001. And that means?
10 years.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that line? Okay, page 9. This would be this one here. We got the League of the Jews here. 161, 158. And this is brought about by Syrian oppression in the history of the Jews. That's why they reach out to Rome. So it's identifying Syrian oppression, and we're understanding Syria to be typifying Russia here at the end. Russia flew past Japan yesterday with bombers that are capable of dropping nuclear weapons in order to have a backdrop for Tillerson's discussion with Putin. It's just why people aren't seeing that the light of Daniel 11 is shining well before midnight, I don't get it. This is the Battle of Actium, which would be lining up down here with the Battle of Panium, double battles. Actium a sea battle, Panium a land battle. This is the end of the King of the South, so the characteristics at the beginning of the King of the South back in 1793 are going to be in there. This is the 360 of the time of Daniel 11:24. I never noticed it through. I never said anything, nor did I notice it through the years. I've dealt with 31 BC repeatedly, many times, but I always knew there was. I just wrote it off. Okay, the fullness of year. There's something there. This is for 31 BC to 330 is not 360 years. It's 361. But once we got into this study, then the information comes to light that the Battle of Actium is 31 BC, but Rome still had to finish off conquering Egypt, and that they finally take full control of Egypt in 30 BC. And so from 30 BC to 330, you do have exactly the 360, but you also go back into that history, and Constantine he made his decision, I think it was a law, a ruling, that in 329 he was going to move the capital. So you have a year, 31 to 30 and 329 to 330 in both the beginning and ending of this prophecy. So in the past, I've been saying 31 to 330. It's been accurate enough to make the point. But if you're going to get technically correct, this prophecy has a 1 year wiggle room on both the beginning and the end. Okay, here is anyway. Any other thoughts on that?
I have a question. Would the League of the Jews be lined up with the League of the Nations?
The League of the Jews be lined up with the League of the Nations.
The League of the Nations is another word for one world order, whatever you want to call it. But
Well, at this point, we haven't been lining it up that way, based upon the presidents. We've been using the article of the... You mean the League of the Nations in the early 20th century?
well, that's when he began. But I'm saying when it's actually going to take place, because it hasn't really happened yet completely.
What hasn't happened?
The one world order being put in place completely everywhere.
Well, so you want to put
I'm just asking if
this here at the Sunday law?
no. I don't understand.
Isn't that when the seventh kingdom is fully in place?
It is. I mean, but even this process is like progressive, right? It begins and slowly gets to the top point. But I was just thinking about the League of the Jews. Really, when they enter into this league, the Jews representing God's people and Roman representing the world, being the fourth power that basically controlled the world at that point.
The fourth power?
The fourth kingdom, pagan Rome.
I don't know. I think the League of the Jews, it may be typifying other things, but it's pretty sound there. That at midnight, Adventism reaches out to government of the United States. Okay, page 10. Cato the Elder. This is what we're going to deal with here as we read on, right? Now, when we first began understanding that Daniel 11 was identifying the last four presidents, we did so by the four Persian kings, yet three, and then the fourth shall be far richer. And then we came to understand a second witness in the Roman powers from Pompey, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and Tiberius. So we have four Roman rulers that are specifically marked in Daniel 11. But he's going to go into this history now and identify some other Roman rulers and make a case that they can be lined up as well. So we are in the bottom paragraph on page 10. But another point worth noting in this consideration is the fact that between the history of 168 BC and 65 BC, here's the 168. I'm going to take just a little bit out of that so you can see that. To 65, this is the history he's dealing with. There are four prominent leaders of the Roman Republic noted in history. Providentially, these same individuals are singled out in the writings of the Adventist pioneers. It is also worth noting that this history marks four individuals as significantly contributing, even legislatively, to the overturning of their nation's constitution and the eventual demise of the Roman Republic. And one of the reasons for this was a gradual shift in the Republic's role from simply managing the affairs of its own nation to bearing the weight of the world as it was morphing into the Roman Empire. This necessitated a change in its political system, and this change was gradually introduced by these four Roman rulers. These facts of history confirm the fact that between 1989, 168, and the Midnight Cry, we would expect four leaders, not of the Romans, but of the American Republic, which the former typified the last four presidents of the United States. And based upon the prophetic pattern, these four leaders would contribute significantly to the overturning of the U.S. Constitution and the demise of that nation. As the Roman Republic before it, one of the reasons for this state of affairs is the gradual shift in America's role from exemplifying the principles of civil and religious liberty in its own affairs to having to bear the weight of directly governing the world. Thus, the United States is morphing from being a republic to becoming the leader of universal empire, the one world government. When we first began to teach Daniel 11 verse 40 on a regular basis, I think there's probably still people that will argue. I was marking 1989 as the collapse of the Soviet Union and the time of the end. But there was people that say, no, I forget all their arguments, you should be put in 1991. So there was always people that were throwing out it should be 1991, not 1989. And my basic argument, the reason that I stuck on 1989, among other reasons, was the three walls. I had seen three walls in those three verses, the King of the South, the glorious land, and Egypt. Those three walls being the symbolic walls, the wall of the Iron Curtain that went down in 1989, the wall of separation of church and state that goes down at the Sunday Law, and then the wall of national sovereignty that goes down when Egypt is conquered. So those are all symbolic, theoretical walls, but I was using that because when Rome conquered the world, you had three geographical areas, east, south, pleasant land. And when Papal Rome took control of the world, you had three horns, Heruli, Ostrogoths, and Vandals. So I see these three walls, and for me, what marked the bringing down of the Iron Curtain, the symbolic wall of the Iron Curtain, was 1989 and the bringing down of the Berlin Wall. Okay, so you had a historical events were set before the people and prophecy was seen to be. I took the bringing down of the Berlin Wall as the anchor to say 1989. But there has always been an argument that the perestroika isn't fully implemented until 1991. I forget the details of the argument because I didn't pay too close attention to him back then because I wasn't going to budge on that. But it's kind of interesting now. If over the time we used to think the time of the end was a point in time, we've came to understand it's a period of time. It encompasses both President Reagan and Bush. So we've grown in our understanding of what prophetically the time of the end is. So it's interesting now that in 1991, Bush is making this pronouncement about a new world order on September 11th, 1991, and exactly 10 years later, September 11th, 2001, you have September 11th, you have 9/11, and what he's saying, he's talking about the Roman Republic getting dissembled, taken apart in order to morph into another government that's going to control the world. And that's what's, from 1989 onward, everyone's saying the United States is the lone superpower, it's the policeman of the world. That's what it's been doing. It's been morphing in to this position that Revelation 13 says it's got to be in, because it's going to force the whole world to worship the papacy. So it's got to get there. And so I'm agreeing with his argument, but I'm also throwing in there, there's bound to be something in this 1991, September 11th, 1991 to September 11th, 2001. Giant step forward in those 10 years towards a new world order. Sister Kathy?
In 168 BC, the prominent leader noted was Cato the Elder. He is noted in history for his conservatism and opposition to Hellenization or Greek culture. He was actually actively involved in trying to combat Hellenization and was the first to write history in Latin. It has already been shown that 168 BC typifies 1989, and the leader of the American Republic at that time was Bush the Elder. And the compiler suggests that Cato the Elder's combat with Hellenization typified George H.W. Bush's combat with communism. If this is accurate, it would be another argument to show how Grecia or Greece can typify Russia. For Russia was the capital of the Communist Soviet Union. Following Cato, the four prominent leaders were Gracchi. There is a doubling of Gracchus, i.e., two family members who both worked in the Republic's government and contributed significantly, and thus as a plurality, they were called Gracchi. Perhaps it is highlighting the fact that two members of the Clinton family worked for the U.S. government. For just before leaving office in 2001, Clinton became the first U.S. president to be married to a U.S. senator. Gaius Marius, who was a contemporary with Cato the Younger, perhaps serving as a symbol of the presidency of Bush the Younger. Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great, these would correspond in the antitypical fulfillment with William Jefferson Clinton, George Walker Bush, Barack Hussein Obama, and Donald James Trump, respectively. In the politics of the Roman Republic, history notes two contending ideologies that were upheld by these leaders and made manifest in their policies. The focus of this document will be the policies of Sulla and Pompey. History notes the following concerning these two leaders of the Roman Republic.
So, are you noticing that maybe that's the way they spell it in Africa, but Hussein is that how that's not really how he spells his name, right? He spells it like with an H. Okay, that don't matter, but are you noticing that Cato the Younger is lining up with Bush the Younger, and Cato the Elder is lining up with Bush the Elder? I mean, how would that happen? Unless the Lord was providentially. So that's a good anchor to hold this line as valid in my mind. It's not the only thing you need, but pretty profound. You want to read some more or pass it on? It's up to you.
I'll finish the quotes here. Sulla's dictatorship came during a high point in the struggle between optimates and populares, the former seeking to maintain the Senate's oligarchy and the latter espousing populism. In a dispute over the Eastern Army Command, initially awarded to Sulla by the Senate but reneged at Gaius Marius's intrigues, Sulla unconstitutionally marched his armies into Rome and defeated Marius in battle. After his second march on Rome, he revived the office of dictator, which had been inactive since the Second Punic War over a century before, and used his powers to enact a series of reforms to the Roman constitution meant to restore the primacy of the Senate and limit tribune power. That's from Wikipedia. Second quote, the optimates' cause reached its peak under the dictatorship in 81 BC of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla's administration stripped the assemblies of nearly all power, raised the number of members of the Senate from 300 to 600, executed an equally large number of populares via proscription lists, and settled thousands of soldiers in northern Italy. However, after Sulla's withdrawal from public life in 80 BC and subsequent death 78 BC, many of their policies were gradually reversed.
So Sulla would be Obama. I don't know why he's anyway, the idea that his policies are getting reversed fits. The other stuff, maybe. Sister Carol?
Without getting into too much of the detail, the politics of Sulla has its modern counterpart in the politics of the Democratic Party of the United States. He sought to uphold the primacy of the Senate and consolidate the establishment's or aristocrats' hold on power. The Optimate's political ideology reached its peak in the tenure of Sulla, and he was not only the third of those Roman rulers, thus typifying Barack Obama, the third of the last four presidents, but he is a striking symbol of the Obama's administration policies. According to Daniel 11:20, the glory of the Democratic Kingdom was in Obama's time in office. But as history has foretold in the transaction of the Roman Republic, most of his policies are to be repealed. This is what Pompey, when he gained political ascendancy. Although he was born of nobility, most of his policies in the Roman Republic were a manifestation of populist principles. He is indeed a fit symbol of Donald Trump, for since day one he has been busy with the president's pen, reversing all that the Democrats put in place in the time of Obama. The glory of democratic ideology is past, for this current president is not only against their social principles, but he is the last president of the United States, the vile person of Daniel 11:21, who brings God's people to the cross. The Sunday law. Below are a few quotes concerning Pompey, for which the compiler will give but few comments, for he believes they are straightforward and understandable, and these characteristics fearfully find a fulfillment in President Trump, confirming the foregoing application of symbols.
Okay, so the next quotes are going to be about Trump. But this line here, he's noting, lining up with Bush, Cato the Elder, and it's Bush the Elder. Marius, the younger, is lining up with Bush the Younger. Sulla is the height of his political...
Democratic.
Yeah, but I mean, in Sulla's time, that's the height of his political, whatever that was called, typifying the height of the Democratic parties. And then Pompey is Trump reversing it. We're seeing that all going on. So there's enough characteristics in that history to see it fit. You want to read the quotes now, Sister Tanya?
Despite the protective fence that Sulla had erected around the Senate, that body soon demonstrated that it lacked the ability to withstand armed adventures. Faced with force of arms, the laws fall silent. The extraordinary and illegal rise to power of Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey during the 70s demonstrates in abundance the truth of that. Pompey invoked or threatened to use the use of force to which he had no legal entitlement. It had been a decade of illegality and violence which saw Pompey rise to an office for which he had fulfilled none of the required qualifications. By 70, indeed Pompey was not even a member of the Senate, and he had demonstrated himself to be a master of political deception and disloyalty. He had been optimate, aristocratic or elite, and populist or democratic, to suit his changing needs. A politician, in short, of considerable talent, but no principles, even by Roman standards.
Go ahead.
David Schroeder in the Roman Empire, page 125.
And that's Trump. Trump was a Democrat, then he was a Republican, he's a populist. I mean, you can see those characteristics in Trump.
Pompey's routes to power had been unorthodox. David Schroeder, Rome, page 126. Pompey's ruthless path to power had left him with many enemies.
Too many.
With too many enemies. Although he remained the single most powerful individual for most of the rest of his life, His ultimate weakness was demonstrated by his need in 60 BC to enter into an alliance, the so-called First Triumvirate, with Crassus and Caesar, to secure goals that should have proved straightforward for one in his position.
Okay, so you're using your Romanian background to pronounce that correctly. Is that how it's correctly pronounced? Triumvirate?
Yeah, it's Latin. Triumvirate.
Okay, because we always kick that around in here. Triumvirate. Okay.
If anybody could do that.
So he's going to enter into a threefold union.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Lucidius, Lucullus had once referred to Pompey as a carrion bird who fed on the leftovers of others, an allusion to the allegation that Pompey's success were largely mopping up operations in the wake of the real success achieved by others. Page 127. Pompey was a man of immense arrogance. He was, in his own eyes, king of Rome in all but name. Pompey evidently believed that without him there was no republic. Page 128, 129. Cicero's perspective was different. He may indeed have made the mistake that many have subsequently of seeing Pompey as a military genius, but a political novice. Page 129. In the mid-60s, Pompey formed a threefold union with Gaius Julius Caesar and Marcus Licinius Crassus. This was an unofficial military political alliance. Historians call this alliance the First Triumvirate. This alliance lasted from 59 BC to 53 BC, 7 years. In September of 54 BC, the daughter of Julius Caesar and wife of Pompey died while giving birth to a girl who also died a few days later. Plutarch wrote that Caesar left that this was the end of his good relationship with Pompey. The news created factional discord and unrest in Rome, as it was thought that the death brought the end of the ties between Caesar and Pompey. Shortly after the death of Julia, Crassus died at the Battle of Caria, May 53 BC. This brought the First Triumvirate to an end. Plutarch thought that fear of Crassus had led to Pompey and Caesar to be decent to each other, to each other, and his death paved the way for the subsequent friction between these two men and the events that eventually led to civil war. There was unrest and factional discord in Rome. In the life of Pompey, Plutarch wrote that the plebeian tribune Lucilius proposed to elect Pompey dictator. Cato opposed this. Lucilius came close to losing his tribunate. Despite all this, 2 consuls for the next year, 53 BC, were elected as usual. In 53 BC, 3 candidates stood for the consulship for 52 BC. Besides resorting to bribery, they promoted factional violence, which Plutarch saw as a civil war. There were renewed and stronger calls for a dictator. Wow. Wikipedia.
Sister Ka.
The rise of Donald Trump to the presidency will not fail to see striking similarities with the history of the rise of Pompey. It is even solemn to realize that their mindsets and characters also bear resemblance to each other. Furthermore, it was Pompey that accomplished the conquest of Syria in 65 BC and the conquest of Judea in 63 BC, and it is Donald Trump that brings Soviet Russia to an end at the midnight cry 65 BC, and ushers in the Sunday Law 63 BC. Shortly after the conquest of Judea, Pompey participated in the first
Triumvirate.
Which some sources describe as a threefold union. This triumvirate eventually saw Julius Caesar established as dictator for life. Similarly, Donald Trump's administration brings together the threefold union of the Bible prophecy at the Sunday law, which will almost immediately exalt the papacy, Julius Caesar, as the absolute ruler of the world just before its final fall at the close of human probation. See Daniel 11:17 through 19 and 42 through 45. This development, however, will take place within the context of raging wars, as was the case in the time of Pompey and Caesar. All these connections confirm the validity of the application of 168 BC to 1989, and therefore of Macedonia, a part of Greece, to the USSR. The next section is the final argument of this document in identifying the realm of Grecia as Soviet Russia, depending on the context.
The second sentence to the last there. All these connections confirm the validity of the application of 168 to 1989, and therefore of Macedonia, a part of Greece, to the USSR. What does he mean by that?
It's the whole into his fortress verse,
Part of the territories.
up to his fortress.
Okay, but he's going. This was his starting point, Macedonia. Okay, one of the things that's argued on the wrong side of the issue is that this Roman horn comes out of Greece. Okay, but that's incorrect. This Roman horn starts all on its own, but it begins its conquest of taking the world in Macedonia. Okay, so, but when it conquers Macedonia, it's not done conquering that power. There's going to be a second step to the conquering. Conquering of the Soviet Union is 2 steps. 1989 takes his territory. The Battle of Panium, it takes the capital. So I think that's what he's tying in here. So now we're getting to Daniel 8. Go ahead.
I don't know if this have any relation to what we're really dealing, but in our time, I know that President Bush Sr. made a statement about the fact that conquering or waiting for Russia to join the United Nations, it would help them to go towards this one world order. And this is what
Russia was in the United Nations. Wasn't Russia? I can't be positive
I
now.
have a-
Russia wasn't in the United Nations before 1989. You sure?
Well, I have here, I sent you an email. I don't know if you took a chance to look at it, but there's an invitation, and it was done let's see here. In December 7, 1988, Michael Gorbachev addresses the UN, and he basically says that world progress is only possible through a new world order. And then May 12, 1989, President Bush invites the Soviet to join world order. That's maybe different than the UN, right?
Yeah, it's different than the United
Okay.
Nations. He's
So-
saying, come help us put in place a new world order, a one world government.
Yeah.
But the Soviet Union's already on the Security Council in that time period.
Okay, but I guess they're not united towards the one world.
Yeah, the New World Order is a...
But
is
he
a
makes
theory.
he makes a statement that they needed the USSR, and also they were going to take advantage of the war that was taking place at that time in the Middle East.
That's been the globalist design. The Middle East is their third world war button. They believe you need 3 world wars to bring in a one world government. That's why they put the Jews back in the Middle East after World War II, so they had a hot button to push to bring about the Third World War. Did you have your hand up, Brother Tyler?
I was just going to say what you said, that when the Soviet Union gets dissolved, they just transfer the UN seat to the Federation of Russia.
Well, that's even a nice argument.
They actually, I was just, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. But in Wikipedia, they talk about about that transfer, and they talk about why they gave it to Russia and not someone else, because technically Russia was only a part of the Soviet Union. And they make arguments, it was the biggest, this is where it started, and they talk about some of those things.
It was the capital.
It was the capital.
It was the
exactly.
fortress.
Yeah, and they make those kind of arguments, which is interesting.
Okay. You or Cheryl, Daniel 8, the ram and the he-goat.
This document will highlight a point that is beyond its scope to explain, but believes that it can be sustained by biblical witnesses. It is understood in this movement that Daniel 7 is directly connected with Daniel 8, and therefore to be studied and understood together. The compiler suggests that the 4 beasts of Daniel 7 which come out of the earth, see Daniel 7:17, and are referred to as 4 kings, can at one level represent the last 4 presidents which rise in the United States, the earth beast. This line of prophecy sheds light on the meaning of the 4 kings of Daniel 11:2. In Daniel 7, those 4 kings are later referred to as kingdoms, see Daniel 7:23.
Let's read Daniel 7:17 and Daniel 7:23. Daniel 7:17. These great beasts which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. And verse 23 says, Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. His theory here is that this would be Trump. Okay, read on, my brother.
In Daniel 7, those 4 kings are later referred to as kingdoms, see Daniel 7:23, thus showing that in the understanding of the last 4 presidents, the prophecy is not only singling out the presidents.
Our.
No, I know he
It's
says
supposed to be
our the
yeah.
presidents, but I think it's out the presidents. But the role of their respective administrations. The compiler would therefore argue that though it can be noted that Donald Trump is the richest U.S. president in history, the far richer of this fourth king aspect may more accurately be pointing to the global economic control which his administration is to wield in the upcoming crisis. That's the same argument we were talking about back when we were trying to figure out if it was the person or the nation. As under that person, this was the same argument that we were using, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it can be both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the dreadful beast, which was diverse from all the kingdoms before it, is a symbol of the Trump administration, is evident in the prophecy itself. The 10 horns out of this kingdom, said the angel to the beloved prophet, are 10 kings which shall arise. And we know that the one world government of 10 kings arises from the work of the Trump administration, and another shall rise after them. This is the papacy, and thus the threefold union is made up. The 4th beast was diverse, and the government that Trump is trying to build is indeed diverse from previous U.S. administrations.
Okay, so verse 23 again in Daniel 7 says, Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Verse 24, And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. That's 10 kings, United Nations. And another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. That's the papacy coming after conquering 3 powers to take control of the world. Anyway, read on.
Then to Daniel's gaze was opened the most holy place and the judgment scene which represents the binding off experience, when the temple in heaven is open to God's people. Thus we see that the 4th administration brings God's people to their respective binding off periods, confirming that it is the last. The point is, Daniel 7 and 8 are to be understood as a unit. and Daniel 7 is a line that takes us through the history of last four presidents, emphasizes the character, the work, and eventual destruction of the fourth of those administrations, and also identifies the binding off experience for God's people. It is an established truth in Adventism and in this movement that the visions of Daniel 7 and 8 are based on the principles of repeat and enlarge. Accordingly, the compiler contends that Daniel 8 repeats and enlarges upon Daniel 7, particularly in the emphasis placed on the fourth U.S. administration. But there are obvious differences between the foregoing visions, one of them being the fact that Babylon is excluded from the vision of Daniel 8. Due to this anomaly and other considerations which may or may not be brought to view in this document, the compiler suggests that Daniel 8 is not primarily providing a witness to Daniel 7's four kings in terms of the U.S. presidents, but it is emphasizing the prophetic period for the final work of the third angel's message in the final generation, the period of the last U.S. administration. This is made apparent upon realizing that the Lord chose to begin the vision of Daniel 8 with the Medes and Persians, where he desired to emphasize the starting point for the 2,300 days, the foundation and central pillar of Adventism.
It's almost like he gave a second witness with Trump to make sure that we know that that is it. You know, with his personal and then the world.
Sister Tanya, then Brother Tyler.
I have a thought in Daniel 7, 2, it says, Daniel spake, and I said, I saw my vision by night. Behold, four winds of the heavens strove upon the sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. And then in Daniel also 7, 7 talks about, and I saw the night vision, and behold, the four beasts dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and he had iron teeth, and devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And he was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and he had 10 horns. That we can apply this to the last four people that he was talking there in Rome, to Pompey, Sulla, Marius, and Gracchi, because these came out of the old world. Rome as being the fourth kingdom, but when you focus in and you look at it, this came out of the sea, and the beast out of Revelation comes out of the earth is United States. Do you see what I'm saying?
And Rome typifies the United States. Yes?
Yeah, but the first power comes out of the sea, and the second power comes out of the earth. And in this chapter 7, you have both of these coming. The first cycle comes out of the sea, the second cycle comes out of the earth.
Tyler?
Two things. Firstly, in that paragraph we just read before, the one that I was reading, it talks about the diversity of this beast, and he's saying that these represent these four kings, and that Trump would be this last one, the dreadful and terrible one, that's different than the rest. It's interesting because in Daniel, several times in Daniel, I think it's 24, 37, and 38, it talks about how...
What chapter?
Daniel 11.
Okay.
How it talks about how Trump will do something that his fathers never did. Fathers representing these other kingdoms, and he's going to do this different work, this diverse work, so to speak, so that fits. And my other question was, in the paragraph that Cheryl just read, what is he saying in the last part there about Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 at the beginning? I know he's saying that it starts, that Babylon isn't marked in Daniel 8, but what is he saying that means? Did he say that there? And I'm just missing.
He's saying that in Adventism, Adventism, I guess he's right. I haven't ever checked this out. Adventism understands that chapter 8 is a repeat and enlarge on chapter 7. In this movement, we've understood that as well, but we've emphasized that Daniel 7 is talking about the political, and Daniel 8 is talking about the religious. So he's noting that characteristic. It's repeat and enlarge. 7 is the state. 8 is the church. Internal, external. But he's saying that because Daniel 8, Babylon's left off, it's giving him prophetic license to say that what is being illustrated in Daniel 8 in context of the religious is more a focusing not on the 4 presidents, but on the last presidency. And he's going to have to prove that in this paper, but what I'm saying is you have the justification for seeing a difference, because there is a difference between state in chapter 7, church in chapter 8. So you've got to repeat and enlarge, but there's a definite difference, and it's in. I think I'm already seeing him make the case that in the last presidency, Trump, you're seeing the binding off of God's people, which is the 2,300 days. So that line is about the sealing of God's people. So it seemed to me that's the direction he's going. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, I guess he hasn't said it yet. He's just making the point that he's going to make that point.
Yeah.
I've always thought that the reason, the historical reason is it tells you the time. Babylon had already passed away at that point when he was given that part of the vision. So that would be, I don't know what he's going to say, but the way I've understood it is that that's 9/11 because Babylon, the first president, or the first, I have always understood this as the four abominations, that these also represent that, which they do on another line of thought, but it starts you at 9/11 because Babylon has already fallen away, and now you're standing at this Media Persia, which I think would be 9/11.
Yeah, that's his argument. It starts with Mede and Persia to say that this is about the United States, but I think he's taking it one step further. This is the last president of the United States because all the prophets are speaking at the end. So, go ahead. The difference is he may not be placing it at 9/11. You're placing it at 9/11.
Yeah, my point is that, and he's going to probably prove me wrong, but I'm just saying before we get there that
I thought you already read this.
I didn't get this far. It's at Shushan. It's Media Persia, which is the second. So a lot of these things point you to 9/11. So I don't know if he's going to apply all of this just to the last president, and he's going to have to prove to me why that's okay to do, but I guess we'll find out.
So are we saying that Daniel 8 could actually be applied to just the different phases of the United States through these different...
Let's read on. Let's not make any assumptions that we grapple with before we get to his claims.
The 2300 days began in the time of the Medes and Persians with the third decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus, and it concluded in the history of the United States on October 22nd, 1844, with the arrival of the third angel's message. Thus, at one level, the emphasis of the 2300 days is the third angel's message, for both the third decree and the third angel's message in Millerite history typifying the perfect fulfillment of the third angel's message in our history. According to inspiration, the third angel's message is the binding off message. See Early Writings 118, paragraph 1. Therefore, without getting into the intricacies, the third angel's message at the end of the world begins its prophetic work at the binding off for the priest. But this is not...
Is that correct? At midnight, do we place October 22nd, 1844?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's correct.
But this is not where the third angel is to conclude his work. For there are yet others who are to undergo a similar experience. In accordance with these considerations, the compiler suggests that the beginning of the work of the third angel at the binding off for the priest has been typified by the beginning of the 2300 days at the third decree of King Artaxerxes.
Okay, so I just said the binding off is typified by October 22nd, 1844, and he immediately says, he wants to show that it's October 22nd, 457 BC. Do we have a problem with that? No, because the beginning illustrates the end. Okay. And you have Ezra, anyway, no, we don't have a problem with that. prophetically.
Therefore, the compiler suggests that the focus of the vision of Daniel 8 is the time of the last U.S. administration, which brings us to midnight, and all the other subsequent waymarks of our reform movement. Thus, the attention placed on the fourth administration, the fourth beast, in Daniel 7, is carried forward to the vision of Daniel 8.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's repeat and enlarge, and Daniel 8 is enlarging the fourth beast of Daniel 7.
That's what I was asking. That's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which would make sense.
It's workable if he can bring witnesses to bear to show it. You guys? One of you?
Daniel was carried in vision to Shushan, the palace, in order to provide a point of reference for God's students of prophecy to correctly reckon the 2300 days. The compiler suggests that he was actually carried to the year 457 BC in the vision of Daniel 8. But at the end of the world, Daniel was carried to 457 BC to give God's people a point of reference for correctly locating the work of the third angel in the binding off periods. The two-horned ram that he sees is already understood to represent the two-horned beast of the United States. But the compiler contends that the vision is emphasizing the last administration of this two-horned beast. It was in the time of the ram of Bible prophecy that the third decree was passed and the 2300-day prophecy began. So it is in the time of the Trump administration that the sealing and binding off of God's people by the third angel begins. There seems to be characteristics in the vision of Daniel 8 which confirms this premise. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. Daniel 8:3-4.
The two horns of the United States symbolize republicanism and Protestantism, civil and religious liberty. These principles are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, but the prophecy of Daniel 8 informs us that one horn is to gain the ascendancy over the other. It is a subject of Bible prophecy that the United States is to form an image of the beast at the end of the world, and the inspired definition of the image of the beast identifies the church as having the ascendancy over the state. Therefore, the higher horn is the Protestant horn. It has already been identified in the discussions at the school in Arkansas that the Protestants undoubtedly gained the ascendancy over the U.S. government at the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th, 2017. For Donald Trump's support base are the evangelicals, apostate Protestantism. And what an influence they have over him. That the higher came up last is a further confirmation of the truthfulness of Trump's role in Bible prophecy as the last president of the United States. This is because Daniel 8 clearly shows that the Protestant horn would gain the ascendancy last or at the end. How this would be achieved is explained in Daniel 8:4. The ram pushed against three obstacles, and none could stand before him. And through the entrance of Donald James Trump into the Oval Office, the apostate Protestants have pushed against the executive, White House, legislative, Congress, and judicial Supreme Court branches of government and prevailed. Now none can stand before them or deliver out of their hand, but they shall do according
I think it's do.
They shall do according to their will and exalt themselves or become great. We are fast approaching the time when the United States will speak as a dragon, but the prophecy of Daniel 8 continues. And as I was considering, behold, an he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran upon him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and broke his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. Daniel 8 verses 5 through 8. A conflict is represented between the ram and a he goat with a notable horn. Historically, this was referring to the overthrow of the Persian Empire and the establishment of the Grecian Empire. The compiler does not also deny the general application of these symbols to the United States. The
That
ram.
also shouldn't be in there, but go ahead.
Okay. The compiler does not deny the general application of these symbols to the United States, the ram, and the United Nations, the he goat. But the compiler will contend that there is another application which may be worthy of consideration. The prophecy of Daniel 11:3, when identifying the change from Persia to Greece, simply depicts the rise of the Grecian Empire, with no reference to a military campaign launched against Persia by Greece. In Daniel 8, the case is different. This prophecy depicts a direct confrontation and a conflict between the ram and the he goat. The compiler know of no prophetic lines which identify a direct confrontation or conflict between the United States and the United Nations, which the former conceding defeat. But there are enough witnesses, however, which portray an engagement between the United States under Donald Trump and Soviet Russia. The he goat represented Grecia, and the compiler suggests that in the present truth application, the notable horn face of the he goat of Daniel 8 is Russia. This would be another witness to the concept that the Grecia, which Trump stirs up all against at the end of the world, is Russia. A few proof texts may show this application to be plausible.
And what did Trump say yesterday? The world's in a terrible mess, and it's, or something like that, based upon what Tillerson told him from his discussion with Putin that day. Go ahead.
Were you going anywhere else?
No, just that it's consistent with Trump's about his business of getting the whole world turned against Russia.
Doesn't that, what he just said there at the end, kind of break down that last sentence, two sentences, break down his logic from Daniel 11? Because his whole point about Daniel 11 is that Alexander's Greece was different than the Greeks beforehand. But now he's saying they're the same. He's saying that Alexander is also Russia. Maybe it's a case of just different context, different symbols. But it seems like that just broke down his logic for why it was so strong before.
Where are you talking? What sentence?
I'll read it. The he goat represents Grecia, and the compiler suggests that in the present truth application, the notable horn phase of the he goat of Daniel 8 is Russia. So he's saying the notable horn phase of the he goat is Russia. He's saying that in that notable horn is the same horn that he was saying in Daniel 11:2 or 3, where Daniel 11:3, where he was saying that there's two different Greeks. That there's Alexander the Great's Greek, and there's the Greeks from the earlier time, And he was saying that there are two different ones, and the first one, the earlier time period, was Russia, but now, and he was saying the difference is that this one, the notable horn in Daniel 11, was Alexander, and they're two different Greeks. But now he's saying even the notable horn is Russia. Do you see the? He's saying they're both Russia. There's. And
No,
maybe
no, no,
it's-
I'm not following you.
I'm not
But I think I was following you, and I think it's because you don't finish your thoughts that you lose me. Stick to Daniel 11. You're saying he claims that there's two Greeces in Daniel 11, verse 2 or 3.
2 and 3. So he's saying in Daniel
Two
11,
faces.
verse 2, this is the earlier section of Greek history with Leonidas and Thermopylae and Themistocles,
And that's
was
Russia.
That was Russia.
And then the next verse 3 is the United
Alexander
Nations.
the Great in verse 3 is the United States, or not the United States. It's the United States turning into the
It's the United Nations.
the United Nations.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's in Daniel 11, 2 and 3, it's Russia and the United Nations.
Mhm.
And then here he's saying,
He's saying that that same
Notable horn.
that the notable horn, which is the Greece from Daniel 11, 3, is also Russia. And I guess
but he's saying,
Different
but he's saying it's Russia.
that's my point. Is he saying both Greeks are Russia? Both Greeces are Russia.
Yeah, but he's saying it's Russia. What's he going to say about the four horns that come out of that horn?
I don't know. I don't know what he's about to say.
Isn't he going to say it's the United Nations?
I don't know. Maybe if
Doesn't four represent worldwide?
we haven't.
So
gotten
I think
there
he's
yet.
seeing the same. He may. I know we'll get there, but I think he's showing the same sequence, and he may have expressed it in a way that's causing you to stumble. But he's not
No,
denying
I'm
that.
stumbling, I'm just saying.
No, well, whatever. Whatever you're doing, that produces your curiosity. But he's holding to the idea that Greece is first Russia, then the United Nations in Daniel 11, 2 and 3. And at least here, he's saying it begins with Russia.
But he's saying the he-goat represents Greece, and the compiler suggests that in the present truth application, the notable horn, Alexander the Great, the notable horn phase of the he-goat of Daniel 8 is Russia.
Okay.
That same Russia is, that same Greece, the notable horn Greece, is the Greece of Daniel 11:3.
Isn't he saying that Greece is the he-goat and the notable horn is the first prophetic fulfillment of Greece?
The way I'm reading it is he's saying, I'm reading it just exactly how he's saying it. He's saying the he-goat of Daniel 8, the notable phase of the he-goat of Daniel 8 is Russia,
That's the horn.
which is the horn.
What's the goat?
The goat, I don't know what he's describing the goat as. I don't know if he's even making the distinction between the horn
Well,
and
I'm
the
trying to
goat,
defend
Yeah,
him
he
without
is.
worrying about his distinction. The goat is Greece.
which is in this.
Greece in the general sense, and the first phase of it prophetically is the notable horn, which is Russia. But that notable horn is going to get broken, and out of it are going to come four horns
which will be, though we're not there yet.
worldwide.
Yeah. He's going to explain it in the next paragraph.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it breaks down his own logic.
Not if the next paragraph clarifies it.
Yeah.
Let's
We'll
read
see.
it.
Yeah, we'll see. Sister Tanya?
So, what give him license and what I approve what he's doing is that word notable, and I've talked to you about this earlier. That word notable is another portion of the word hazon, vision, is hazut. So what basically what the writer wants us to let us know that this horn, it becomes now a portion of part of the hazon vision, but it's like a small portion of it, which gives us the license to break it up and start a different line of the vision hazon. Do you see what I'm saying? And the same thing, the notable horn.
You're saying that the notable horn, because the word notable has for its root the Hazon vision,
It's actually
that
vision
he's
horn.
isolating part of the Hazon vision with that horn, saying this is a little part of a bigger picture.
Yes. So basically, the word notable should really be reading the horn of vision, because that's what it is. Basically, it's a vision.
Just dropped your handkerchief.
something that
sister.
you have to really notice and focus into it because it's going to give you more details of a history.
And when you get to Daniel 11, the last verse of Daniel 10, and I don't know that they're the same words, but Gabriel says to Daniel, I'm going to show you what has been noted in the scripture of truth. There was a hand over here or something?
Yeah, it was Angelina.
I was just gonna say it answers his question, his answer in the next paragraph.
Okay.
Let's read it.
And I was going to say that the whole premise of his argument is that Daniel 8 shows a confrontation between both symbols. And he was noting that from the transition from Greece, from
The notable horn. Go ahead.
the transition from Persia to Greece was not
Okay.
confrontational.
In Daniel 11.
Historically, in Daniel 11. So he's saying that the history of Daniel 8 from verses 1 through to 7 represents better what is pictured in Daniel 11:2 with the going against the realms of Grecia, with Grecia being the power that comes out supreme, which would be Russia, a type of
Raphia.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that this word notable, it's found in Daniel 8:8. Doubling.
Let's read the next paragraph. Who's reading?
Firstly, the document contends that the ram is especially representing the Trump administration of the United States government, where the horn of Protestantism gains the ascendancy over the state. Secondly, this ram enters into a conflict in which it is defeated. And based on Daniel 11:11, we understand that the conflict in which the Trump administration is to suffer a humiliating defeat is against Russia. Therefore, the he-goat in its notable horn phase is probably Russia. A stronger connection is seen...
Notice the word phase
Yeah.
in its notable horn
Horn
phase.
phase.
He's using that he-goat to symbolize more than one thing because he's saying phase. Go ahead.
A stronger connection is seen by proof texting the word color. The word color only appears twice in the Bible, translated as such, and both occurrences are in the book of Daniel. One is Daniel 11:11 and is referring to the king of the south, Russia's, successful warfare against the king of the north, the United States. And the other is Daniel 8:7, identifying the he-goats, successful warfare against the ram, the United States. The compiler suggests the first phase of the he-goat is Russia, for the pattern in Daniel 8 and 11 is the same. Furthermore, Daniel 11:12 informs us that as a result of the king of the south's unexpected victory, his heart was lifted up. But it also tells us that he would not be strengthened by it. Daniel 8:8 informs us that as a result of the he-goat's victory, it waxed very great. The word great is gadol, which means self-exaltation. Thus, a parity, is seen between the king of the south in Daniel 11:11 and the Grecian he-goat in Daniel 8:8.
Amen.
Another interesting consideration is the phrase, when he was strong, in connection with the he-goat's triumph over the ram in Daniel 8:8. The identical phrase is employed in 2 Chronicles 26 concerning the self-exaltation of another king of the south, King Uzziah. This passage has already been identified as a proof text for Daniel 11:11 and 12, and its profundity is further amplified by the fact that it employs a phrase from Daniel 8's description of the notable horn phase of the he-goat, and a phrase from Daniel 11's description of the king of the south together in the same verse. The compiler suggests that these links cannot be ignored, and therefore the notable horn phase of the Grecian he-goat would be Russia. But when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction, for he transgressed against the Lord his God,
and went into the temple of the Lord to burn incense upon the altar of incense. 2 Chronicles 26:16.
With this in mind, the compiler will seek to make further application of Daniel 8, verses 5 through 8, and the explanation Gabriel gives from verse 20 onwards. When the he-goat comes against the ram, he broke his two horns and stamped upon him. Thus we can see when the United States suffers defeat at the hands of Russia at midnight, it will be of such a magnitude as to significantly undermine the principles of the U.S. Constitution. The two horns are broken. The angel Gabriel explains the following concerning these two powers of prophecy. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between the eyes is the first king. Daniel 8:20 and 21.
I have a question. How would this battle is referring to undermine the principles of the U.S. Constitution?
That's, from the very outset, that's been, I get it, but it's hard for me to understand how Russia can defeat the United States, go back into Russia, bring about a persecution, a religious persecution in Russia, and fulfillment of 2 Chronicles and the King of the South's work after this unexpected victory, and that somehow telegraphs a crisis in the United States that leads the Protestants, the Adventist Church, to seek some kind of connection with the government. But there's enough lines coming together that even though the exact details of it may seem kind of clouded, it seems like it has to take, that it's right.
I just thought if this could happen again, in April 12, 1952, John Foster Dulles, later to become Secretary of State, says in a speech to the American Bar Association, Louisiana, Kentucky, that treaty laws can override the Constitution. He says treaty can take power away from Congress and give it to the president. They can take powers from the states and give them to the federal government or to some international body, and they can cut across the right given to the people by their Constitutional Bill of Rights. A Senate amendment proposed by GOP Senator John Bricker would have provided that no treaty could supersede the Constitution, but it fails to pass by one vote. I was just wondering if this could happen again, to actually could give the power to...
No, it doesn't have to happen again. That's the law of the land.
Okay.
That's why all the Republicans were so scared about Obama entering into a treaty on global warming, because treaties supersede the Constitution. If this Battle of Raffia produces some kind of peace treaty that technically a treaty overrides the Constitution. Because some of these treaties that have been designed, the argument of the Republicans, the conservatives, is that's technically correct, is that the New World Order, the United Nations, could come in here to Arkansas and arrest one of us if we were using the water on our land incorrectly, polluting it according to their definition. I've heard that discussed, so maybe it's some kind of treaty of that nature. I don't know.
So what if we know that Russia's going to win, and the blame is going to come from the president saying, if I would have given the power, we could have won, but because I had my hand tied and I wasn't able to do what I needed to do.
That's another step.
Yeah, I'm saying, but because
dictatorship.
of that blaming situation that the president says, well, you guys didn't allow me to do what I wanted to do, and then they say, okay, we're going to give you the power, do what you need to do. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sister
That
Kathy?
could happen.
I was just going to say that the first Constitutional Convention was in 1787 for the Articles of Confederation, and it was stimulated by severe economic troubles which produced radical political movements. And they went in and the comment was that they went in and it came out with a totally new document, even though it became the Constitution, and they were saying that this is, and I was thinking that since this is the beginning, severe economic troubles brought that Constitutional Convention. Is it possible that at the end that'll bring in another constitutional convention.
And when they have a constitutional convention, then anything can happen.
And, yeah.
So I would suggest that before Sunday's class, we all read to the end of this. There's only 6 more pages roughly before you get to the bibliography.
I have a question. When was the world introduced to terrorism? Does anybody know?
Right? Well, in the first woe.
Well, according to this, it says that September 11, 1972, the world was introduced to terrorism, and 1972 Munich Olympic
It was
Games.
before that. If you're talking about modern terrorism, long ago, I looked it up, and it came right after the introduction of the United Nations. Right after 1945, you have your first terrorist acts. They begin to escalate. They're taking one that to them is the most significant, whoever wrote that probably. But there was some before then. Because I was noting that it wasn't until the United Nations was established in history that terrorism comes, because Islam is going to be the power that brings every man's hand together. And so I know it was before 72. Brother Nathan, you want to have a closing prayer?
Our Father in heaven, we thank you, Lord, for this study, and we ask, Lord, for more clarity upon these things being discussed, that you would open up your truth unto us, Lord, as long as we make ourselves willing to understand and study these things out diligently. And we ask these things that they would remain upon our minds, that your word may have its desired effect upon us, transforming our hearts from the inside out. We also ask, as we go about our daily works, that you would go with us, and that your angels would be round about to protect us from any evil influences. We also ask for your blessings upon our friends and loved ones. All this in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.